Welcome. My name is Odette Youssef. I am a reporter with WBEZ in Chicago, the NPR affiliate, and I am also a member of the Shortlist committee for the Chicago Humanities Festival. Raise your hand if you have heard of the Shortlist. Nice. If you have not heard of it, the Shortlist is the Chicago Humanities Festival for curious, culturally savvy young professionals in their 20s and 30s. And I am delighted to say that this is the first year that the Shortlist was able to fundraise to support a program at the festival. We set a goal on Indiegogo, an online campaign to raise money, to raise $3,000 for the program that you're going to see tonight. We blew through that goal and we raised $5,000. So thank you to the Shortlist Committee for supporting the excellent work that the Chicago Humanities Festival does. I would like to introduce you now to the moderator of today's program. Amy Dickinson is a name that I'm sure you have all heard. She, of course, writes the syndicated column in the Chicago Tribune, Ask Amy, and I'm glad to say she's also a panelist for NPR's Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. Please welcome Amy Dickinson to the stage.
Odette. Hi, full house. We love to see that. Well, it's my great pleasure to be here, to see all of my friends here in Chicago and to introduce the main event. 10 years ago, last week, Daniel Jones started editing the Modern Love column for the New York Times. Don't tell the Tribune I'm here. In that time, he's opened a great space and a great paper for real people, people just like you, to tell their true, modern, true life love stories. But lots of relationships, when they hit the 10-year mark, they start to hit the doldrums. Not so with the Modern Love column. It continues to be fresh and wonderful and funny. Dan's new book, Love Illuminated, uses these stories, these wonderful, true life, modern love stories, as a springboard to deliver a primer on life and on love. Please help me welcome Daniel Jones.
Thank you.
I was saying we should really call this modern chairs.
Modern furniture. So, God, it's so great to be here. I'm a little intimidated to be here with Amy, who I'm worried knows more about love than I do. She has more Twitter followers than I do.
More marriages than you have.
More marriages.
More
readers than I do, by 22 million or so. But I'm very grateful that she's here. I feel like I should be interviewing her, but she's also a better interviewer than I am. So we're sort of stuck with this arrangement. I'm really happy to be here in Chicago. I've never spent any time in Chicago, and I've had a great time. There are various rules for the Modern Love column, and you have to write about people. You can't write about your love of your favorite book, or your favorite teddy bear, or your favorite place, and you can't write about your why you love a city. But I feel like after spending the weekend in Chicago, that I'll be open to any love stories, any love stories that you want to write about Chicago. I won't publish them, but I'd be curious to read them. It would be hard to publish in New York anyway. I'm here with my wife and son, who they're in the crowd somewhere. I don't want to know where they are, but my son joked, my wife is always bringing an apple along when she's sitting in an audience somewhere, and he joked that she would probably take a bite of that apple at the most quiet moment of tonight's performance. So listen for that. Tonight, we're going to start off with a sampler of Modern Love. This column may be sort of managed and curated by me, but it's the voices of hundreds of others. Now we'll hear from two modern love essayists, both Chicago-based, two of my favorite essays that we've ever run, and two of the most powerful that had the greatest response from readers. In touring around for this book, I wanted to acknowledge essayists that had appeared in the column with a gift or some sort of token that they could preferably wear that would identify them as modern love essayists. So I went online and got...
Sort of like the I survived modern love and all I got is this lousy t-shirt.
Exactly. But it couldn't cost more than 50 cents.
Oh.
So I got these, and they were heart-shaped, which I thought was perfect. And it even says modern love essayist on them. But when you put them on your wrist, a wrist, it turns out, isn't heart-shaped. And it rides up like what I thought of as a sunburned ass. So these became the sunburned ass bracelets. And I've passed these out. I have 500 of them, and I've been passing them out around the country. And a sunburned ass, it turns out, is the perfect thing to symbolize the modern love column, because what exemplifies it more than an overexposed private part? So as the essay has come out tonight, I'll go down on one knee like I've never done in my life and give them theirs. The first person we're going to be hearing from is Courtney Quinney. Courtney Quinney, a writer and poet, is the author of Filibuster to Delay a Kiss and other poems. I love that title, Filibuster to Delay a Kiss. Published by Random House. In her modern love column, published 2 summers ago under the headline, The View from the Victim Room, she writes poetically about violence, domestic violence, committed against her by her then-boyfriend. Her bracing account of that day and the months to follow is among the more wrenching and beautiful essays we've ever published. Now, Courtney's going to come out here, and she actually took a fall the other day and has a big sort of bruise and scab on her nose. And she wanted me to assure you that this is not from some recent domestic violence episode. She's long free of that. We only have time for teasers tonight, so Courtney is going to tease you with the opening 200 words of her essay. Please welcome Courtney Quinney. You get one of these.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Courtney. I would like to thank the Chicago Humanities Festival for letting me even speak to you guys. And also Dan for taking a chance on me. When I sent him my essay, I just thought, well, I'll send this to the New York Times because they're never gonna fucking publish it. And then he wrote me an email. And I was like, oh my God, maybe they're gonna fucking publish this. And we had a talk, and he was really kind and patient with me, and I was definitely going through a very rough spot in my life. And in addition to helping me with my essay, he asked me at one point, well, are you afraid if you publish this, your ex will retaliate? And I hadn't thought about it until that point. But then I had some more nightmares. But I felt that it was really important to publish something about domestic violence. And he walked me through every step of the way, and it was awesome. So thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for whatever this is. I couldn't hear everything from back there.
It was just to throw you off.
I'm gonna wear it till it falls off. So this is the beginning of my column. The Domestic Violence Division of the Circuit Court of Cook County is in a surprisingly pretty brick building. No one there seems to stare much if you sob while you are waiting for your lawyer. The guard who asked me to remove the pen in my ponytail so I would clear the metal detector did so with impressive grace. Everyone is gentle. The price of admission is abuse. In this court, your ex is referred to as a respondent. I was there because my ex beat me. If anyone had asked me before my beating if I would defend myself when attacked, I would have said, yes, of course I would. But I didn't hit the respondent back. It never occurred to me that someone who claimed to love me would hit me so deliberately and repeatedly. As he hit me, my field of vision shrank to the space inhabited by swinging fists, and I was too busy shielding my face to do much. It turns out, protecting your face takes a great deal of effort when someone is hell-bent on wrecking it. I remember thinking, getting punched really hurts, as if this were some profound epiphany. When I found myself cornered by a phone, I didn't hesitate to pick it up and dial 911. I didn't think about the legal or personal ramifications. I didn't think at all. But when I said help and started rattling off the address, he wrenched the phone away, which is when I fled, out the elevator and down to the building's front steps, where I waited, shuddering for the cops. Thank you.
Thank you, Courtney. It's fantastic. David Finch. A few years ago, David Finch was working as a marketing engineer for a semiconductor manufacturer. He was also a man with a story to tell. That story, published in the Modern Love column under the headline, "Somewhere Inside, A Path to Empathy," changed his life and the lives of many others. He knew he was struggling in his marriage. What he didn't know was that he had Asperger's syndrome. After his essay ran, a powerful literary agent I know emailed me for David's contact information. She said something along the lines of, "Isn't that every long-suffering wife's fantasy, that her inattentive husband secretly has Asperger's?" That essay led to David's first book, The Journal of Best Practices, which became a New York Times bestseller. Tonight, he'll be teasing you with the first few hundred words of his essay. Please welcome David Finch. You get one of these too, even though you couldn't hear. It's your official Modern Love essayist bracelet.
This is awesome. This is why I drove in. Thank you so much. I love coming and getting free stuff. I've actually had the great fortune to work with Dan a couple times, and the other story that we worked on together was also a gift situation. I bought my wife lingerie, and she laughed and laughed and laughed, and that's how my night went. And you guys out there, don't buy lingerie. They don't want it. It's a chore. That's not what this is about. This is called Somewhere Inside, A Path to Empathy. It wasn't working, any of it. Our third year of marriage threatened to be our last. I'd become cynical and withdrawn, obsessive and preoccupied, dismissive and unhelpful. "I don't know when things got bad," Kristen said, wiping away tears. "I feel like I've lost you, and I don't know what will bring you back." In reality, she hadn't lost me. She'd found me. The facade of semi-normalcy I'd struggled to maintain was falling away, revealing the person I'd been since childhood. I didn't even know what was wrong with me, though my wife, a speech pathologist who worked with autistic children, had her suspicions. Even so, it would be another 2 years before she would put all the pieces together and attach a name to what was ruining our marriage: Asperger's syndrome. During Kristen's first few years of practice, she worked only with severely autistic children. But as she expanded her clientele to include higher functioning kids, she started learning more about Asperger's syndrome, a comparatively mild autism spectrum disorder characterized by egocentricity and impairments in communication and socialization. That's when she started seeing parallels to my behaviors. One evening after we put the kids to bed, Kristen approached me with a smile, wrapped me in a hug, and asked me to come downstairs to her office. First, she allowed me to complete my 8:30 p.m. routine, fully aware of how essential it is to my peace of mind. First, circle the downstairs, note which lights are on, and then stare out the front window, visually lining up the neighbors' rooftops. I finally joined her at her desk, where she sat at the computer ready to administer an online Asperger's evaluation. Looking somehow clinical in her pajamas, Kristen instructed me to answer the questions honestly. No problem, since I'm honest to a fault when I choose to speak to people. For the next 2 hours, she led me through questions that at times had us both laughing with recognition. Do you often talk about your special interests, whether or not others seem interested? And I thought, gee, who's not interested in cleaning product slogans? Question number 2, do you rock back and forth or side to side for comfort, to calm yourself? When excited or overstimulated? Where's the hidden camera, I thought. Do you get frustrated if you can't sit in your favorite seat? Friendships have ended over this. And on it went. Thank you.
Wow, that is that really illustrates beautifully, actually, the spectrum of, speaking of spectrums, the spectrum of the essays that appear in the column. I'm going to remind people they can send questions to us via Twitter, use the hashtag CHF2014. So I'm curious about what, once you started this column, how it evolved, and if there was a moment in the early years when you felt like, oh, this is what it is. It's a telling of you're getting at the truth, the heart of some very unusual stories. Was there a moment that you
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. My wife and I started this column together, interestingly enough. We had edited these anthologies with the ridiculous titles of The Bitch in the House and The Bastard on the Couch was the male response. And these were collections about frustrations in marriage. And the style editor at the Times had read these books and had an article written about them. And he wanted to have that kind of material, these personal essays, longer form than what's in the back of the magazine, the Lives page, which was the only other real personal narrative in the Times back then. Now there's a lot. So he contacted us about this idea he had for this column, and just writing about not love in terms of romance, but love in terms of what a powerhouse it is, and what it makes people do, and not all of it is good. And so we thought, well, why does that belong in Sunday Styles? That was our first reaction. But we couldn't say no. We thought that was, a really interesting offer. And my wife is a novelist, and she was working on a novel at the time. So we worked on it together to get it launched, and then I took it over by the time it started.
Just like a guy does. Anyway.
Moves in and takes it over. And I was really just looking for the stories that interested me most. I'm not sure I had an agenda beyond that. And I was looking at it as a forum that was incredibly public, where people were confessing to incredibly intimate feelings, fears, desires, and there's a powerful sort of resonance to that, or can be, and so I wanted it to be a forum where the way love is now, that it didn't used to always be, can be explored, whether that means how technology is affecting relationships, how families are formed in new ways, gay marriage was galloping along as a political issue and a social issue, and how was that changing people's minds about what marriage and a family could be and how you could have children. I wanted to be a forum where those things could be discussed openly. What the column became after I sort of saw what was appearing and what was moving readers, very often the column is the most important story in a person's life. And it was years into the column before I realized that. And it isn't always. Sometimes it's lighter, sometimes it's a series of funny dates, but probably 70% of the time, it's the most important story in the person's life, told in 5 double-spaced pages. And that, once I realized that, I could sort of see what it was doing and where it was heading and what the potential was.
In 10 years, so much has changed. I've been writing my advice column for 11 years, and, nobody had heard of Facebook, there was no social media. Technology has just transformed the ways that people can get into trouble, which is where I come in. But the world has changed in other ways as well. You mentioned in the book, the first time you welcomed an essay from a transsexual. Mm-hmm. And this was something you had wanted to tell, the story of a transsexual, and Jenny
Finney Boylan,
Boyle. I don't know if any of you are aware of her work. You probably are, but she's an incredibly important writer in any regard. She's a professor, and it has been so honest about her own journey as a then father of 2, married, and then becoming a woman through all this and maintaining these relationships. So it's fascinating. Right. But how did you get there with her?
Yeah, and well, there were a topic like that. I thought I want, these stories are humanized. You can talk abstractly about someone going through a sexual transition, and it's just not the same thing as hearing it from someone who is going through that or someone who is married to someone going through that. And so I wanted that experience in the column. I get about 5,000 submissions a year. At this point, I was 4 years into the column. I had not gotten a single submission on this topic, and I found that sort of hard to believe, and I had to seek her out. This was an essay that was appearing in longer form in an anthology, and so I contacted her and I said, can I run this in the paper and boil it down to a shorter version and have it appear in the column? And I worked with her to do that. It's a piece about normal life in abnormal circumstances, but very much a normal life. This is me getting along with my children.
And my wife.
They sit down around, they're sitting down after she's gone through this conversion, and they're sitting with their children. Says, well, what should we, the one child says, well, what should we call you now? And they have this sort of funny conversation where they arrive on calling her Maddie. It was a combination of mommy and daddy. And because they thought Dommy wouldn't really sound as good. So they call her Maddie. But it was a family that loves each other, and we're talking about this circumstance, and the way that she was able to get that down was kind of groundbreaking, I thought. Anyway, so no submissions in probably 4 or 5 years from a single person going through that experience or related to someone going through that experience. Within the next few years, it was like a dam broke, and we not only received, but we received dozens and dozens and dozens of these kinds of accounts, and published a lot of them, to the point where an essay would come in like that, and I'd have to say, sorry, we've been there. There's got to be another wrinkle. This is the same sort of arc has happened with someone coming out as gay. Like, it's just not. That was a story. Various versions of that were a story when this column started. It's just not a story anymore. And it's funny because the actress Maria Bello wrote a column last year, I guess it was last spring, about coming out, not so much as lesbian, but as someone who is loving a woman then, and who had loved men, and didn't want to be characterized as either bisexual or lesbian, as you're just saying, this is who I love, and I want to muddy the waters a little bit with this and say, this is about love, it's not about labels. And when the story first came in, I thought, well, is coming out really a story? Is this, you sure you want to do this professionally and all of that? And I was so naive. I don't know, I can't believe how naive I was after this long in the job. And that story came out, and it was picked up by every single newspaper and blog worldwide. It was covered as a big story, and I was completely surprised by that. I'm embarrassed to say, just thinking, is that a story? Yeah, it turned out to be a story.
Well, your capacity for surprise, I think it's probably a really good trait in somebody who does what you do or what I do. It's like, because if you...
Get bored easily.
Right. I mean, I go through my email and I'm like, no, you're kidding me. So you have to be excited by what people are doing and what they're saying, what their story is. So this book is really interesting. It's not a collection. It's more of a, like I said, a primer, and it starts out pretty much with a quiz, right? Mm-hmm. And so the reader is led through these, really a series of lessons, and you use the stories that people have told you over the years to sort of illustrate various points. And so I have to ask you, the way, people ask me all the time, like, so are you like this perfect lover now? Like, you have everything? Like, who made you God? Like, and basically it's the, what have you learned doing this?
I know. That's the question, and it's, I think this is sort of what I appreciate about love more than anything, is that knowing more doesn't necessarily lead to behaving better. Or being able to think your way through difficult emotions. And smart people are not better at love than dumb people. And there are a lot of smart people who, and I feel like the promise of technology too is that it can make us figure this out, through algorithms or through just pure volume of being able to seek out that one, special person. And there's so many ways that we try to think our way through love. There are ways I write about also in the book that we try to think our way out of our bad behavior, like infidelity, which turns from an act of passion to an act of rationalization in various ways. And, I feel like I've learned, because most of what I receive is from women, and most of what I publish is from women. It's about 70 or 80% submissions by women and 20 to 30 from men. I've definitely learned what's on women's minds, and I feel very empathetic toward women in a way that I didn't before. Does that make me an ideal husband? I'm afraid not. It just doesn't. It doesn't translate that easily.
Right. No. Well, one of the things you talk about in the book is sort of the rise of the epistolary romance where two people never meet. What's that Joaquin Phoenix movie where he falls in love with the voice? Like Her.
Yeah.
And you tell stories of these very lengthy romances where these online relationships. There's one that just blew my mind, of this couple that, they move through all the different online stages of courting, and they end up, of course, where's it going? Straight to Skype, full nudity on Skype. Hours of this. It's sort of like my worst nightmare, but some people like it. So, but then they meet in person, and what happens?
It doesn't often translate to being in person together. I mean, I'm fascinated by this because this has been something that I've received a lot about and heard a lot about in the last few years. And we've held a couple of college essay contests, and the second one, that was the main theme, was students, anyway, college student age, writing about having their most the most important relationship, love relationship in their life be something that was an electronic relationship. It was all online, either with someone they'd left back home or someone they've met online. And this snowballing into sort of a deep, rich, emotional relationship that's only conducted online, there's something that we, for some reason, think is elevated in terms of, a physical relationship is considered a shallow relationship if it's only a physical relationship. But an emotional relationship we consider as something to be rich and sort of on some sort of elevated plane. But I kind of object to that in a way. I feel like we deceive ourselves. We can deceive ourselves just as much and have just as sort of narrow of a relationship that's online, because you're curating who you are.
Right.
The person can't. You're hiding and presenting in a way, and you're emboldened by the medium of feeling like nothing's at stake. And I think we have to feel like something's really at stake and we're vulnerable and at risk. And often in online relationships, you don't feel vulnerable and you don't feel at risk, especially at the beginning, because it doesn't feel like it's real. And so it can snowball into this deep thing. And then when you match up with the person, you say, okay, we've got to get together. This is too good to be true. And sometimes it works, it seems like, but often it doesn't.
Yeah.
And often when it doesn't, in one case with these two college students, the guy was used to getting his emotional fix from the device.
Yeah, she's trying to talk to
So-
him in IRL, and he's like still on the laptop, because it turns out that's sort of where he lives over
Like
there.
they couldn't keep
Yeah.
their virtual hands off each other when they were online, but in person they were bored by each other's company. And part of why they were bored by each other's company was because of the habit of looking at their smartphone or looking at their laptop. And we sort of forget how much of a draw that is and how habitual that is and how much emotional energy we put into that device and those sort of repetitive patterns. And it's hard for a relationship to make that sort of sudden shift.
A million years ago, I was on Match.com for about a year, and what I learned very quickly was that I could not correspond with people. I would just use email to set up the coffee date, because what I found was that if the guy was a good writer, I would fall for him. And it turns out writers are kind of assholes. It's like, I mean, we know that, right? I already knew that. I didn't need to relearn that. So, and it was amazing how once I sort of made that transition, I stopped corresponding with people. I would just go like, okay, well, let's meet. And then people often would get scared, but the meeting, 10 minutes, you can sort of tell what's going to happen.
And it's often shy people who seek out those ways of connecting. So if they're shy in person, but then they seek out to connect online and become a really vivacious and fun online and all that. But then when they get in person, they're like, oh no, I'm still this same person that I was.
I recently ran a letter in my column from a 23-year-old who, it really reminded me of some of the stories in your book, because she said, I came up in college, through the hookup culture, and now I've met a guy I really like, but I don't want to have sex with him because I really like him, but I don't know how to talk to him about that. We've been out 3 or 4 times. And it really interested me how we've sort of flipped that whole idea of vulnerability, and how invulnerable I think you feel if you're just hooking up, but it's so much harder to have a conversation. So can you talk about that a little bit, the idea of vulnerability?
I mean, what I finally came to see, especially in reading, so this was when we had these essay contests from colleges across the country. It amounted to thousands of essays. And what I thought, both from those essays and from people's stories in their 20s, is that the people, I mean, it's known that people are delaying having that first serious relation, that the one relationship, until they're in their late 20s and they're more established, and they don't want relationships to interfere with education and with jobs and with their mobility and all of that. And a lot of what hooking up seems to be through those years, along with relationships that are online during those years, is fragmenting your relationship life into pieces that aren't wholes. Almost, I don't know if it's unconsciously or intentionally, but definitely getting all your needs met, getting your emotional needs met and your physical needs met, but keeping them separate and not allowing either one to become a relationship, because you're 23 and you don't want, that's not what you're looking for. You don't want to be held back by that. So that seems to be a lot of what's going on during all those years, and I don't see anything wrong with it, to tell you the truth. I mean, it's a matter of practicality for people. What happens, it's a problem though, is when you try to think, well, I don't want to feel that way, so I'm not going to. It's like the hookup that turns into where one person starts to fall in love and they want this to turn into something, but they know that the rules are against that, and it's all going to come crumbling down if they say anything. That's kind of painful to watch.
I'm actually checking out some of these Twitter questions, and there's one I love. So I'll just read it to you. Is there a column that you regret running where somebody got hurt by it?
That I regret running?
Where there was a consequence that was unintended and...
Yeah, I don't... in the early days of the column, I didn't really know how to do it, I have to say, as much as I've learned how to do it. And in the earlier days of the column, there'd be a piece that, it was about a breakup, and, one person didn't... they don't really come off looking bad, but it's not like they want it in the newspaper. And they would be hurt, and I would find out they were hurt because they contacted the person who wrote it. As these things happened now and then, we became much more careful about not really what we were publishing, but in bringing people into it earlier who were subjects of essays, letting people know.
So you would let, like, if a guy wrote about a breakup, would you contact the woman or the ex?
Well, we would ask the writer to contact the ex.
Wow.
And this is all sort of based, every essay is different, and the concerns are different in every essay, but generally the rule is that, we're going to get in touch with, you need to let this person know. We don't want the person surprised. And it's sort of a shifting game of like, okay, well, how are we going to do this in the best way possible? Because it's also, you're allowed to tell your story.
Right.
These are personal stories. You can't really live your life, without interacting with other people. And some people, you can't predict how people will react either, because some people who are, maybe not portrayed in the best light in a piece are like, New York Times, yeah, I'm,
awesome.
That's me, And they're just so psyched about it. And someone else, like there was a mother-in-law in one essay.
There's always a mother-in-law,
There's always a mother-in-law
out there, and they're waiting for you.
And she came off, she was really the hero. She wasn't a main character in the story, but her actions in the story were kind of heroic and admirable. And she said, you can't write about me in a newspaper, absolutely not. You can't do that. And the writer honored her request and withdrew the piece, and that was that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, and that's a good daughter-in-law or son-in-law. Yeah, that's
most people,
impressive.
most of the writers, when they get in these conflicts, they're the ones who have to continue dealing with the people,
Sure.
and they usually, more often than not, they respect the person's wishes. It's all handled before publication, and yeah.
Mm-hmm. I know that Courtney's story, which is so raw and, I don't know, it's really something, and it got a huge response. And I know that you verified what you could about the details of her court case. And
in Courtney's case, we have to be more careful when it comes to criminal acts and all of that. With I forget exactly but I remember reading some pretty gruesome medical records from the hospital emergency room and things like that. With every essay, it's different, but I always want to see something about what this background is.
Mm-hmm. Aside from the two tonight, which were just so great and such a great sort of bookends, Is there one that stands out for you as sort of like that just touched you so much that you like called up your wife and read it to her?
God, it's always so hard to
Like
pick,
old people. Aren't old people great when they write their... I feel like I'm pitching.
One of the most popular pieces we ran was by a woman named Eve Pell, who lives in San Francisco. And it was a very tender piece about, I think she's 85, or early 80s at any rate. And she'd been divorced, and she was a runner and in a running club. And she met this guy who was her also mid-80s, and they forged this relationship. And she wrote about, and then he unfortunately died. This is what happens when you fall in love at 85. You know, he died after they were together only a couple of years, and he was in very good health, and they were both runners. And then he got some sort of ocular cancer in his eye and died. But she wrote very tenderly about how love at that age feels exactly like love in junior high school.
It does. I'm here to tell you. I know. It's kind of a cliche, but you really do continue to feel like my husband and I were like the world's oldest newlyweds.
It was like, sort of sweaty palms in the movie theater together. And she was like, that was the most unexpected thing for her, that was possible at that age. And after having a lot of she'd been married twice, I think, and she thought she was well past all of that. And what they had was short, but it was really meaningful.
That's how powerful it is. Somebody is asking you, what's the celebrity factor in getting a piece into your column? Maria Bello Wise.
Yeah, there's no... I'm very democratic about the process. Everything comes in to an email box that only comes to me. I would like to have staff, but nobody has staff anymore.
I know. Here's another twist. I get this all the time. People will address emails to me, "Dear Amy, staff." And I'll go like,
I get that all the time.
Alert them.
All my staff and assistants.
I'll have my staff look into it. Yeah, I'll run it down to the lab. That's what I know.
So I am more interested in unknown writers and people telling their most important story. So with this story, she wanted to talk about it in advance. And I have had many sort of celebrity encounters where they want to talk about something, and it's usually they just want to talk, and you are there to listen and adore, and they never send anything, and nothing ever comes of it. And so I was jaded by the time she wanted to talk, and I said, well, why doesn't she just send an essay if she wants to send an essay? Mm-hmm. But she had she really had something that she needed to have some sort of trust established first, and as soon as she began talking, I understood what the issue was. But we don't solicit any of these essays. They have to be written, and they have to be sent in, and nobody gets sort of special treatment.
I know. I love how some people I was the editor for All Things Considered's on-air essays, also dealing with people who had never been published before, and some people think they can just pitch you an idea. And when you say, well, write it down, that sounds awesome, write it down. Yeah. They're like, what? I have to write this thing? It's sort of like they think that you will do that for them or with them, and it doesn't really work that way.
Also, I feel like this column and what it's about is unpitchable. If you can say what your essay is about in one sentence, then it's probably not an essay that's right for the column. I don't feel like Courtney's essay can be captured in one sentence. I don't feel like David's can be captured in one sentence. And it's all in how it's presented anyway. So whenever I get that sort of pitch, it doesn't go very far. It's all in how you do it.
Can you describe the concept you introduced in your book, which is called soulmate in a box? I love that.
Soulmate in a box goes back to what we were talking about before, which is this idea of the most important relationship in your life being a soulmate who's at the other end of an electronic cable. And it's just become something that is so common. Mm-hmm. And, college students 7 years ago were writing all about hooking up and struggling with what that meant and their ambivalence about it. And 3 years later, they were writing about the soulmate in a box kind of concept. Like, this is the person who's most important to me, yet I never. And the amount of sharing sort of that goes on between them is at such a deep level, and yet no physical contact at all.
Right, and so it's sort of an evolution of the sort of the hookup concept, because this soulmate in a box is feeding the person's heart and emotions, and
It's a combo package.
Right. Wow, talk about a business opportunity for somebody out there. Soulmate in a box. Then we're being asked, can you speak about Larry Smith's column in Orange is the New Black? Are you happy with how it was portrayed on the show?
Well, it was portrayed completely wrong on the show.
Awesome.
That's what happens in TV shows. I loved that this happened. I mean, it was such a treat for me. He didn't tell me anything about it. Larry has published a couple of columns in Modern Love, and the first one came out when Piper was in prison, and was about him. It didn't mention that she was about to go to prison, but having to go was what spurred two very reluctant people to marry. They did not want. They were both scared of that commitment, and because she was going away, they thought, okay, well, we've just got to, we've got to do this. That's the piece that came out when she was in prison. That's the one that she read in prison. It didn't out anything about what was happening in the prison. And there's even a scene in her book where she's reading it on the bunk, and it's like she feels like it's a love letter to her.
Oh.
Then he wrote a second one that came out when her memoir was published that was about this brotherhood, unlikely brotherhood of men from New York who all every weekend go up and visit their wives and girlfriends in prison.
Wow.
And they stop at Trader Joe's along the way and get snacks and whatever, and then go to the visiting room. And it was really a funny piece about the unlikely bonds you form because of circumstance. But when that plot point, this show had been in the works for a long time. It had been cast and shot, and he'd kept this secret from me all this time that his Modern Love column was even a part of it. And my niece binged watched the show as soon as it came out, and emailed me and was like, "Your column is in Orange is the New Black." And it was so funny to see it and see how they need to change it to make it more dramatic. And at one point, Larry, who's such a schmeal sort of in the show, and he says, he sells the piece to Modern Love, and he's in a bar, and his friend says, "Modern Love, that's a really big deal." He's like, "I know." It's like, yeah,
Crazy.
Go Larry.
You made it. The seventh circle of celebrity. It's happening.
Barely touching it.
I'm going to ask one more Twitter question, which I love. Have your views about faith and relationships changed a lot in the last 10 years, based, I assume, on the material you're reading?
I'm amazed at the bravery of people, I have to say, that I just did not, some of these accounts of people, of what people do who are in relationships where someone is dying or is in just a very trying situation, and the way that people can stick through that, I find is remarkable, because I feel like I'm the biggest coward in the world, and I know my wife fears that as well.
Wait, you have to tell a little story about when you and your wife were preparing your wedding vows.
Mm-hmm. My wife is real practical about romance, and she wanted to water down our wedding vows.
Or make it more accurate, whichever way you see it.
It's the same thing, yeah. To say, instead of "I promise to," I will try very hard to. And
I'll
she
try
wanted
my
to
hardest.
just excise that word "promise" and replace with "try very hard to" in every case. And it wasn't that I was against that. I'm all for trying very hard rather than promising. But I just thought, on that case, she'd fought a lot of battles in this run-up to the wedding of not wanting to do any of the traditional things, and I was fine with all those too. But when it came to this one, I thought, we'll be doing this in front of, our 200 family members and friends and all of that, and that they would start laughing, just like you guys just did. And I didn't think that would be the best moment, when we're really trying to close the deal, to have everybody just, burst into laughter.
Oh my. So you said you've received maybe 50,000 submissions over the years.
Over the 10 years, yeah, that's
Amazing.
sort of my guess.
And how hard is it to turn people down? Like, what happens when you say, oh, it's not a good fit, or, it's not for us? What happens?
Some people, most people take that well. I write a very nice rejection note. I put everyone's name at the top, and I'm torn about it because, on the one hand, this is really the most important story of that person's life. But for me, this job is about saying no. People ask what my job is like. It's about saying no 120 or so times a week and saying yes once. And often those no's are to people who are are people with a lot of expectations that they're going to be published, and it can become difficult. Sometimes, but it's a nice note. Nevertheless, sometimes it evokes, in this age of email, nasty responses. And I just happen to have a few here.
Ooh. Oh, good.
So this first one, I didn't realize was actually a complaint at the beginning.
Perfect.
Dear editor of Modern Love, you need help, professional help. And I thought, I really do need help, and I especially need professional help. I could use, several assistants. So at this point, I didn't really realize where this was headed. Dear editor of Modern Love, you need help, professional help. Journalists are having to work at Al Jazeera. Do you want that to happen to you? What does that even mean? I'm like, well, what?
It sounds like he would personally drive you there.
They're going to transfer me to Al Jazeera Modern Love column?
Like he's going to do it, yeah.
Another person wrote, you didn't even read it, dude. Normally I don't respond to these, but with these, like this one, I couldn't resist. So I replied, dude, I totally did. That's the bad news. I totally did. One woman I rejected, I felt sorry for this woman. She forwarded my form note to her mother. And the vagaries of, hitting reply all or whatever, I don't know what happened, but she didn't even write back to her daughter, the mother. She wrote directly to me, but meant to be writing to her daughter. And she wrote, well, I liked it. Fuck the New York Times. Love, Mom.
No, that's a good mom. That's a modern mom,
That's a good
right?
mom. Very supportive. Little coarse, but very supportive. Another person wrote, I think your choice is a foolish one. Your past submission decisions have proven as much, and my career will further reveal this truth to you. But his career has not. This was several years ago, and his career has not revealed that truth to me.
I think we need to give him a call, see how it's going.
The last one. Dear Mr. Jones, is there really a Mr. Jones? The story I submitted is compelling and evokes a mountain of emotion. I'm beginning to wonder if I have to know somebody, or know somebody who knows somebody. I don't know anybody. Am I dead? With this letter, yes, I probably am.
Oh.
Those were the written Those were the written notes that were a little off the wall. Then there was the audio file I received. So this woman's essay was about how she would cover songs. She was a singer and a songwriter and played the mandolin. So she would cover songs with her playing on the mandolin and send the MP3 files as gifts to people as acts of love. And this was a very sweet piece, but it just didn't work as an essay. It didn't really have an arc. It didn't really lead anywhere. But I thought that was a very sweet idea. Anyway, I rejected it with a form rejection note. And a few days later, this email comes without a subject line and without any content except for an MP3 file.
And you opened it? Wow.
So I opened this email, and I pressed play. I'm thinking, is this going to be someone on a tirade, to mandolin? And I heard this.
I know when to go out, when to stay in,
I didn't know what it was
get
yet,
things done.
and it started to sound familiar.
I catch a paper boy, but things don't.
There's a David Bowie exhibit a few blocks from here.
I'm standing in.
This is David Bowie's Modern Love, covered by her. And I got the biggest smile on my face when this came in and thought, that's how you face rejection. It's a nice gift. Let's listen to it just for a little while. Give it her due.
There's no sign of life.
It's a beautiful job, really.
It's just the power to charm. I'm lying in the rain, but I never wave bye-bye. But I try.
It's coming soon.
Never gonna fall for modern love. Walks beside
Thank you for coming, everybody. That was great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel.